Just quickly going to explain some of the abbreviations and some of the codes that you find in a pattern. A pattern is basically a list of instructions that you're meant to follow, and you just follow each row one at a time. So quickly in the abbreviations that we use in patterns, keep it simple. We've got our 2 stitches, knit and purl, so that's pretty obvious, it's the K and the P. Stocking stitch, which is a stitch pattern where you will be knitting on one row and then purling on the next row, which gives you a really nice flat stitch on one side and a sort of bumpy looking stitch on the other side. We use that in our Fowler hat. Rib is when you alternate knit and purl so that you get a very nice stretchy rim to things like hats. K2 tog, knit 2 together. You use that when you start to decrease. So when you're knitting a hat, for example, it comes in a bit like a triangle. So you decrease your stitches before the end. And there's something called right side. Now that's not a stitch. That's just something that tells you which is the front of your item and which is the back. So the right side of the hat will look different from the inside of your hat. So when we come to knitting and you get to your pattern, you have every single stitch in every single row written out for you. So for example, in this one we have our row 1, which we know from the RS is our right side, and knit 1, and then there's a funny little thing, we've got our star and the brackets. So it does explain this on the pattern, but I know what it's like, sometimes a bit of an overload of information. What this means is whatever's inside the bracket is what you have to repeat until it tells you here. So for example, this one says knit 1, and then inside the bracket is knit 1, purl 1, and then repeat from star to the last stitch and knit 1. Translated, that just means knit 1, knit your next stitch, purl your next stitch, knit your next stitch, purl your next stitch, knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl. Keep going until you've got 1 stitch left on your needle, and then knit that. So that's what that means, and that's how that works. And then as you'll see each row gives you instructions of what to do. There's one last little thing to explain, and that's sometimes at the end of a row you see a number in brackets. So often you'll get that number when you're doing something like decreasing your stitches, and that number is to tell you how many stitches you've got left on your needle at the end of that row. So what you've done here in this row is you've had to knit some stitches together a number of times. You should have at the end of that row 32 stitches on your needle. So it's always a good idea to count your stitches, check how many are on the needle. If they're wrong, you've maybe made a mistake, not the end of the world, you can probably fix it. If you're really out of whack, then maybe you need to think about whether you've done made a mistake, done something wrong, and maybe try and work out how to fix it. But don't worry, if it's not quite right, you somehow want to get to that number of stitches before you start your next row. You can maybe secretly knit 2 together at the beginning of the next row or something, but that's what that number means. So hopefully that's covered enough of the basics of some of the understanding the pattern, but yeah, don't take it too seriously.